He was 6'3", with a sharp jaw, wild hair, and a face that looked like it belonged in an art gallery, not a rock band. Record labels told him he was too old, too strange, too awkward to be anyone's frontman. He ignored every single one of them. By 1984, his band had sold millions of records, and their videos were playing on MTV every hour. He married one of the most famous supermodels on the planet. He produced albums that turned unknown bands into cultural forces, and for a while, it looked like Ric Ocasek had quietly won at everything. But here's what almost nobody talks about. In the final years of his life, his marriage collapsed, his health failed, and weeks before he died, he made a decision so painful that it haunted his family long after the funeral. By the end of this video, you'll understand how an unconventional musician who never looked like a rock star became one of the greatest hitmakers of the MTV era, and why his final chapter remains one of rock's most heartbreaking stories. Everyone remembers Ric Ocasek as the quiet man behind the cars. Almost nobody knows what his life was really like when the cameras stopped rolling. Ric Ocasek didn't grow up dreaming of stadiums. He grew up trying to disappear. Born Richard Theodore Ocasek in Baltimore in 1944, he spent his early years in a household that wasn't built for tenderness. His mother struggled with alcohol. His father, a systems analyst who later worked for NASA, kept an emotional distance that left marks Ric carried for the rest of his life. Years later, his wife would describe his childhood in blunt terms. It wasn't a good one. He escaped whenever he could. He'd wander to the local boardwalks, sometimes disappearing for weeks at a time. His parents didn't always come looking, not running away exactly, just searching for somewhere that felt right, somewhere the tension at home couldn't follow him. Most kids who grow up that way become cautious. They learn to protect themselves by staying small. Ric went the other direction. He found music. The person who changed things was his grandmother. She bought him a Sears and Roebuck guitar when he was 14 years old. She dragged him into her parlor and made him sing for her friends. It was embarrassing and wonderful, and it planted a seed that Baltimore's cold houses couldn't kill. When Ric was 16, his father's NASA job moved the family to Cleveland. New city, no friends. A tall, quiet kid who looked nothing like the other teenagers at Maple Heights High School. He graduated in 1963 and drifted through two colleges, Antioch, Bowling Green. Neither stuck. He wasn't interested in studying. He was interested in Buddy Holly and the Crickets, in the Velvet Underground, in sounds that hadn't been invented yet. Because Ric had already made his decision. He wasn't going to sit behind a desk like his father. He was going to make music, even if nobody was asking him to. He wasn't chasing fame. He was searching for a place where he belonged. The only problem was that nobody wanted to hear it, not yet. And the road ahead would test that decision for over a decade. In Cleveland, Ric saw a kid named Benjamin Orzechowski playing bass on a local TV variety show called The Big Five Show. Ben was younger, good-looking, had a voice that could charm a room full of strangers. They connected a few years later in Columbus, Ohio, and started playing music together almost immediately. This is where most rock documentaries would say the magic started. But the truth is, the magic took years to arrive. Their first band was called ID Nirvana, formed in 1968. Played around Ohio State University, got zero attention. They moved from Columbus to Ann Arbor. More gigs, more empty rooms. Then they relocated to Boston in the early 70s, drawn by its thriving music scene. In Boston, they formed a folk group called Milkwood, inspired by Crosby, Stills, and Nash. They recorded one album for Paramount Records in 1973 called How's the Weather. Nobody bought it. Nobody reviewed it. Nobody cared. The group dissolved before the year was out. Think about that timeline for a moment. By the mid-70s, Ric Ocasek was already in his early 30s. He'd been playing music for over a decade. He had exactly 0 hits, 0 fans, and 0 industry interest. He was married to his first wife, Constance Campbell, in the early 60s. That marriage ended by 1971. He married Suzanne LaPointe the same year. He had children, bills, responsibilities. Most people with that resume would have found a real job. Ric kept writing songs. He and Ben changed their last names. Orzechowski became Orr. Ocasek became Ocasek. They formed another band called Richard and the Rabbits. More small clubs. More silence from the music industry. But something was shifting in Ric's songwriting. He'd been absorbing the proto-punk energy of the Modern Lovers, the icy glamour of Roxy Music, the raw minimalism of the Velvet Underground. He was hearing sounds in his head that didn't fit into any existing category. Punk energy, pop hooks, synthesizer textures, crunchy guitars. Nobody was combining those elements in quite the way Ric imagined them. Most musicians would have quit after 12 years of failure. Ric Ocasek wrote one more batch of songs instead, and one new band would change everything. In late 1976, the final pieces clicked into place. Elliot Easton on lead guitar, Greg Hawkes on keyboards and synthesizers, David Robinson on drums, Ben Orr on bass and vocals, Ric Ocasek writing every song, playing rhythm guitar, and singing lead on most tracks. David Robinson came up with the name, The Cars. Simple, easy to remember, perfect for a band that was about to move very fast. Their first official show happened on New Year's Eve, 1976, at Pease Air Force Base in New Hampshire. Not exactly Madison Square Garden. But the songs were there, and the songs were unlike anything audiences had heard before. Throughout early 1977, the Cars played every club in New England they could book. They had a secret weapon nobody planned for, a demo tape with a song called Just What I Needed. Boston rock station WBCN started playing that demo months before any record deal existed. The phones lit up. Listeners wanted to know who this band was. The demo got heavier rotation than most finished singles on the station. Two major labels came calling, Arista Records and Elektra Records. The Cars signed with Elektra and flew to London to record their debut with producer Roy Thomas Baker, the man behind Queen's biggest records. The self-titled album dropped on June 6, 1978. 3 singles charted. Just What I Needed hit number 27 on the Billboard Hot 100. My Best Friend's Girl reached number 3 in the UK. Good Times Roll landed at 41. Deep cuts like Moving in Stereo and Bye Bye Love became radio staples on their own. The album stayed on the charts for 139 weeks. It was ranked number 4 on Billboard's year-end album chart for 1979. Rolling Stone put the Cars on their cover in January 1979 with the headline, Best New Group. Ric Ocasek was 34 years old. He'd been trying to make it in music for almost half his life. And overnight, the industry that had ignored him for 15 years couldn't get enough. But here's the contradiction that made everything complicated. The Cars were everywhere, and Ric Ocasek didn't look like he belonged anywhere near a stage. He was tall and angular. His features were sharp and unusual. He dressed like a beatnik professor who'd wandered into the wrong decade. In an era when rock frontmen were supposed to be beautiful and explosive, Ric Hill was neither. He was still, controlled, almost detached. He stood at the microphone like he was observing the audience rather than performing for them. And somehow, that's exactly what made people unable to look away. They didn't fit rock, they didn't fit pop, they didn't fit punk. Critics didn't know what to call them. The label said new wave, but that never quite captured what made the Cars different. They had the energy of punk without the mess, the melody of pop without the emptiness, the sophistication of art rock without the pretension. They created something entirely new, and they were about to take it to a level nobody predicted. When MTV launched in August 1981, it rewrote the rules of the music industry overnight. Suddenly, how a band looked mattered as much as how they sounded. Image became currency, and the Cars understood this before almost anyone else. Their 1982 album Shake It Up gave them their first top 10 single with the title track. But the real explosion came 2 years later. Heartbeat City dropped on March 13, 1984. Produced by Robert John Mutt Lange, the same man behind Def Leppard's multi-platinum Pyromania, it was the most polished, radio-ready album the Cars had ever made. Some longtime fans called it a sellout. The band saw it differently. Guitarist Elliot Easton pushed back on the idea that pop and art were separate things. They weren't writing bubblegum one minute and experimental the next. It was all part of the same vision. The album spawned 6 singles: You Might Think, Magic, Drive, Hello Again, Why Can't I Have You, the title track itself. It sold over 4 million copies in the United States alone. The video for You Might Think was one of the first to use computer-generated graphics. A bug with Ric Ocasek's face flew across the screen. An animated Ric chased a woman through a series of surreal transformations. The clip won the very first MTV Video Music Award for Video of the Year. It also took 5 awards at Billboard's 1984 Video Music Awards, including Best Video, Best Conceptual, Most Innovative, Best Editing, and Best Special Effects. Think about the irony. The man who didn't look like a traditional rock star became one of the most recognizable faces on the most visual medium in music history. MTV played Cars videos in constant rotation alongside Prince, Madonna, and Tina Turner. And Ric held his own, not by being flashy, by being impossible to categorize. And then there was Drive, the ballad that changed everything. Ben Orr sang lead, his voice carrying a sadness that felt like midnight. The video was directed by actor Timothy Hutton, and the woman who appeared in that video was a 19-year-old Czech-born model named Paulina Porizkova. She was already one of the most recognizable faces in fashion, the future face of Estee Lauder, a woman who could have dated anyone on the planet, and she fell in love with Ric Ocasek, not despite his strangeness. Because of it, she later said he focused on her in a way nobody else ever had. When Ric decided to turn his attention on you, she said, it was as if the sun came out. The public couldn't make sense of it. The gangly, unconventional rock star and the international supermodel. Tabloids ran stories with barely disguised disbelief. But Ric and Paulina didn't seem to care what anyone thought. There was just one complication. When they met on that video set in 1984, Ric was still married to his second wife, Suzanne. He had children from 2 previous marriages. The relationship with Paulina wouldn't become official for years, but the spark was already there, burning quietly behind the cameras. His biggest creative triumph and his most complicated personal decision happened in the same moment. That pattern would follow him for the rest of his life. But his biggest success wasn't even performing. It was something few fans knew about. While millions watched Ric on MTV, musicians across the country were asking a different question entirely. Could Ric Ocasek produce their records? The answer started with one of the most unlikely partnerships in rock history. In 1983, Ric produced Rock for Light by Bad Brains. This was a hardcore punk and reggae band from Washington, D.C. They played faster and louder than almost anyone alive. They thrashed and screamed and threw themselves against the walls of whatever venue would have them. And Ric Ocasek, the king of polished new wave pop, walked into the studio and captured their ferocity on tape without sanding down a single edge. He produced their Epi I and I Survive before that, balancing dub reggae and furious punk on the same record. It was a pairing that made no sense on paper, and it worked perfectly. That decision told the music world something important about Ric. He wasn't just a hitmaker, he was a listener. He could hear what a band was trying to say and help them say it more clearly. He didn't impose his sound, he amplified theirs. The production credits kept stacking through the 80s and 90s. Romeo Void, Suicide, Bad Religion, Hole, Nada Surf, Jonathan Richman, No Doubt's comeback album Rock Steady in 2001, Guided by Voices, Do the Collapse in 1999, which brought a lo-fi band from Dayton, Ohio, closer to mainstream radio than anyone thought possible. But the album that cemented his producer legacy came in 1994. Weezer was a struggling bar band from Los Angeles that nobody wanted to see. Grunge was dominating everything. Audiences wanted flannel and angst, not nerdy power pop. Their label, Geffen Records, pressured them to use a professional producer. The band sent demo tapes to 3 candidates. They requested Ric Ocasek. To everyone's surprise, Geffen said yes. Ric flew to New York. The band prepared a cover of Just What I Needed for his arrival, a gesture of respect, and then they got to work at Electric Lady Studios in Greenwich Village. The result was Weezer's self-titled debut, the Blue Album, Buddy Holly, Undone, The Sweater Song, Say It Ain't So, My Name is Jonas. It went multi-platinum. Spike Jonze directed the Buddy Holly video, and Weezer went from obscurity to one of the biggest rock bands of the 90s. The album changed the trajectory of 90s rock. It proved there was life beyond grunge, and it proved that Ric Ocasek could hear potential that nobody else could. Rivers Cuomo later described the experience of meeting Ric as being blown away. They became genuine friends. Cuomo said that the friendship meant more to him than any Hollywood connection ever could. When Ric called years later to ask Cuomo's bandmate to play bass at his Rock Hall of Fame induction, it meant more than any celebrity connection. Ric would produce 2 more albums for Weezer, the Green Album in 2001, Everything Will Be All Right in the End in 2014. Each time he brought the same gift, He knew how to make raw songs sound polished without making them sound fake. The man who spent 15 years being rejected by the music industry had become the person other musicians called when they needed someone to believe in their work. And while Ric was quietly building other people's careers, his own band was falling apart. The Cars released their final album, Door to Door, in 1987. It underperformed. Reviews were mixed. The creative tension that had fueled the band's best work had curdled into something colder and less productive. Ric's nature as a songwriter, who insisted on complete control, clashed with band members who felt creatively sidelined. "I never joined a band," Ric once said. "I was never in anyone else's band. I was always the first member, and they always had to do my songs. I wasn't going to do anybody else's." In 1988, with almost no public announcement, the Cars broke up. No dramatic fight, no press conference, just silence. And the silence between Ric and Ben Orr lasted for years. The two men who'd spent over a decade making music together, who'd survived poverty and rejection and failure together, could barely bring themselves to talk. The friendship that had endured everything couldn't survive the weight of success. You'd expect that story to end in permanent regret, and it nearly did. But sometime in the late 90s, while working on a Cars DVD project, Ric and Ben reconnected. They talked. They remembered why they'd started playing music together in the first place. The old walls came down, if only partway. On October 3, 2000, Benjamin Orr died of pancreatic cancer. He was 53 years old. Ric wrote a song called Silver as a tribute. He later told interviewers that something fundamental had broken. The Cars without Ben Orr just didn't feel right. It didn't feel like anything at all. In 1994, Kurt Cobain and Nirvana covered My Best Friend's Girl at what turned out to be their final live show. The Cars' influence was still radiating outward, even as the band itself had ceased to exist. For the next decade, Ric turned down every reunion offer. When Greg Hawkes and Elliot Easton formed the new Cars with Todd Rundgren in 2005, Ric gave his blessing but refused to participate. He kept producing records. He wrote poetry. He painted. He raised his sons with Paulina in their townhouse in Gramercy Park. The spotlight faded. Ric never stopped creating. But the thing that had defined him most, the band that carried his songs into millions of living rooms, was gone. And then, in 2010, something unexpected happened. Nobody expected Ric Ocasek to change his mind, but he did. In 2010, Ric contacted the three surviving members of the Cars, Elliot Easton, Greg Hawkes, David Robinson. He had a batch of new songs. He wanted to make one more album, not as a nostalgia project, as a real record. This was strictly, forget everything that happened before, Ric told Rolling Stone. This is a new thing. They recorded Move Like This and released it in May 2011. It was their first album since Door to Door in 1987, and the only one without Ben Orr. The lead single, Sad Song, carried the band's signature sound, but with an undercurrent of something deeper. Loss, mortality, the passage of time. The Cars embarked on a 12-date tour that summer, playing theaters across the country and finishing at Lollapalooza. It felt like a proper farewell. Not forced, not desperate. Just four old friends playing the songs one more time. And then came the induction. In April 2018, the Cars were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland. Brandon Flowers of The Killers gave a heartfelt speech about hearing their music as a kid in Utah. Weezer's Scott Schreiner played bass in Ben Orr's spot. When Ric took the microphone, he opened with a joke. When the band first started, Ben was supposed to be the lead singer, and I was supposed to be the good-looking guy. After a couple of gigs, I got demoted to just the songwriter. The audience roared. Then his voice softened. It's hard not to notice that Benjamin Orr is not here. He would have been elated to be here on this stage, in his hometown. It feels quite strange to be up here without him. We miss him and love him dearly. They played 4 songs. My Best Friend's Girl. You Might Think, Moving in Stereo. Just what I needed. It was the last time the Cars would ever perform together. Ric later said he saw it as bookends. He'd started playing music in Cleveland. And here, decades later, it was ending in Cleveland too. It would be a good cap on the bottle, he said. But what the audience didn't know was that the hardest chapter of Ric's life was happening off stage. Ric Ocasek married Paulina Poriskova in 1989. They had two sons, Jonathan and Oliver. For the better part of 25 years, their marriage was the anchor of both their lives. Paulina would later describe those early decades with genuine warmth. She'd spent her childhood in Czechoslovakia, then Sweden, searching for the same thing Ric had been searching for: unconditional love. Ric gave it to her. She said he was the first person in her life who made her feel like she was the most important person in the room. He was protective, attentive, devoted. After years of modeling, of being seen by everyone and known by nobody, she finally felt like someone was looking at her. Really looking. They raised their sons in New York. They lived quietly. They avoided the celebrity circuit. For a quarter century, their life together seemed like proof that the strangest love stories can be the most real. But protection, over time, can become control. According to Paulina's interviews in the years after his death, Ric didn't want her to go anywhere. He didn't want her to do anything outside his orbit. He told her what to wear. He told her how to act. She described feeling invisible in her own home, like a piece of furniture someone bumps into at night but never really notices. She gave him an ultimatum. She still loved him. She still wanted the marriage to work. She thought the threat of separation would shake him awake. His response broke her heart. Instead of fighting for the relationship, he retreated further. In May 2018, 1 month after the Cars Hall of Fame induction, Paulina announced publicly that she and Ric had been peacefully separated for a year. Fans noticed that during the ceremony, every other band member thanked their wife in their acceptance speech. Ric mentioned his loving family. He never said Paulina's name. Despite the separation, they continued living together in the same Gramercy Park townhouse. Two people sharing a house but no longer sharing a life. It was, by every account, complicated and painful and deeply private. And then Ric's health failed. In the summer of 2019, Ric underwent surgery to treat stage 0 lung cancer. The procedure was successful. He was recovering at home. Paulina, even though they were separated, stayed close. She cooked for him. She watched TV with their sons. She made sure he was comfortable. On the evening of September 14th, Paulina came home from a friend's birthday celebration. She'd brought some fresh cookies from the bakery. She offered one to Ric. He said no thanks. He was tired. He was going to bed. Those were the last words he ever spoke to her. The next morning, September 15th, was a Sunday. Ric tended to sleep late, rock star hours. By 9 or 10 o'clock, Paulina brought his coffee to his room. He was still in bed. She reached over and touched his cheek to wake him. His skin felt like marble. She didn't call 911 immediately. She didn't scream. She just stood there. She already knew. Ric Ocasek had died peacefully in his sleep, sometime during the night. He was 75 years old. The New York City Medical Examiner's Office ruled his cause of death as hypertensive and atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. Pulmonary emphysema was a contributing factor. Paulina released a statement. She said she and her sons were completely and utterly devastated by his untimely and unexpected death. She asked for privacy to mourn. But the grieving was about to become impossibly complicated. Within weeks, the contents of Ric's will became public. He had signed it on August 28th. Less than 3 weeks before he died, the language was devastating. I have made no provision for my wife, Paulina Periskova, as we are in the process of divorcing. Even if I should die before our divorce is final, Paulina is not entitled to any elective share because she has abandoned me. Abandoned him. The woman who had been caring for him during his recovery, who brought him cookies on his last night alive, who touched his cold cheek the next morning and realized he was gone. She found out the day after his death. The will also reportedly cut out 2 of his sons from a previous marriage, though the sons he had with Paulina were provided for. Paulina later told CBS that the will made grieving almost impossible. I would love to be able to be sad and miss him, and not also feel this incredible hurt and betrayal, she said. She eventually settled with the estate under New York state law. She suspects lawyers may have influenced the will's language. She hopes it wasn't truly Ric's intention. She believes he would have fixed it if he'd lived longer. But she'll never know for certain. The man who helped define the sound of the 1980s was gone. And the silence he left behind was filled with questions nobody could answer. Ric Ocasek never looked like the world's next rock star. He never acted like one. He never chased celebrity the way his peers did. Instead, he sat in rooms with instruments and tape machines and made things that lasted. The Cars' debut album is still considered one of the greatest rock records of the late 70s. Heartbeat City defined the sound of an entire year. The Blue Album launched one of the biggest bands of the 90s. Rock for Light helped legitimize hardcore punk, and dozens of other albums carry his fingerprints in ways most listeners will never realize. The Killers, The Strokes, LCD Sound System, Phoenix. Modern bands have openly cited the Cars as a foundation for their sound. The fusion of punk energy and pop melody and electronic texture that Ric pioneered in the late 70s became the blueprint for entire genres that followed. He wrote 7 solo albums. His 1986 single Emotion in Motion was a top 20 hit. He produced records spanning punk, new wave, power pop, reggae, and alternative rock. He wrote poetry, he painted, he made visual art that few people outside his inner circle ever saw. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2018, standing on a stage in the same city where his grandmother's guitar had first given him a reason to believe. And through all of it, he remained one of the most private and unknowable figures in rock history, a man who spent decades in the public eye, without ever truly revealing himself. Even Greg Hawkes, his bandmate and collaborator for decades, admitted after his death that he never fully understood Ric. In spite of being friends with him and a collaborator for years and years, he was in certain aspects of his life extremely private, Hawkes said. There were a lot of things that were never discussed. Remember the grandmother who bought a 14-year-old kid a guitar from the Sears catalog? The one who made him sing for her friends in the parlor in Baltimore? That kid spent the rest of his life turning that small gift into something extraordinary. He proved that you don't need to look the part. You don't need the industry's permission. You don't need anyone to believe in you, as long as you believe in the song. Ric Ocasek didn't just write songs. He quietly helped shape the sound of modern rock music. And perhaps that's his greatest achievement, not becoming famous, but proving that originality could outlast popularity. The silence he left behind is louder than most bands will ever be.